I wanted to show you today was this one here, bootkit analysis. And this one I think is just extra credit because we're going to use real malware, by the way. So you really got to use a virtual machine. It's bootkit malware. But so you have this thing called Box, and it's already installed on the machines I pre-made. This is an Intel-based machine running in the classroom on an AMD processor. And that's what I'm using. I don't know if you can do this on ARM or not. Box is already installed if you have my pre-made machine, which you probably do. Then you just have to download these pieces of malware. So you turn off your malware scanning, which has already been done if you're using my machine. The whole C drive is excluded from virus scanning. Otherwise, it'll keep deleting this stuff. Then you download this 7-zip file and unzip it with the password infected. And then you'll find a bootkit master folder here. And in the MBR, there are 2 files which include a malicious bootkit to modify the bootloader of the operating system. And they call these bootkits. That's what we're worried about with secure boot, especially the weaknesses in secure boot. If someone can infect your boot process, then you're really hosed. Then your antivirus scanner will do nothing, reinstalling the operating system will do nothing. It's really hard to get rid of it, really hard to detect if you put malware at this level. And so it does happen now and then. It's not very common, but it's a scary kind of infection. And we're going to do it in a very limited environment here. We're going to put up these old-fashioned machines that are booting up something sort of like MS-DOS, and we're going to infect it. So I've already done all this stuff on this machine. You set a path to make it so you can execute Box. This program called Box is a simulator that simulates very simple virtual machines that run text only with very simple operating systems like MS-DOS. And the thing is, we can easily modify the bootloader. Probably could do this stuff in VMware too, but it's not as easy. We're going to use this thing called Box. And so you run this thing called BX image, and then you do disk image creation. And you just choose options off the menu. One to create a new floppy image, and then you take all the defaults. Hard drive, flat file, 10 megabytes, named c.image. That creates a disk image, and this is, you tell it's a very simple operating system, 10 megabytes. So now you can examine its configuration file, and that will just show you what you've got here. It's a BIOS with Box Latest. We're only getting the BIOS of the machine working here, not even really an operating system. And so that's going to create this thing. And then we infect the image by running a Python script, which is going to be here. This is the thing that infects it. It opens the infected mbr.bin to read bytes. It reads it, and then a disk image file, it writes onto it. So it writes this infected stuff onto the hard drive, which is how you infect your hard drive. You modify the boot sector to have modified code. That's what boot sector viruses do. So the original one just made a default boot sector, default BIOS, which is normal, and we modified it with this infected stuff. So you can examine it with HXD. Let me bring that up. All right. And the image, I thought it would have recent files. It does have recent files. There we are. And there it is. C program has box c.image. That's the one I made, and I infected it. So here it is. It's got some data at the top that is not obvious. But if you go down to 2000, you'll see some more familiar stuff. Let me just go down to 200. Then there's a lot of nothing. And there's 2000. That's where the boot up sequence starts. And this is the modified boot up sequence. It's an NTFS partition, and here's the modified code. So that's what you see down there. And this copies the volume boot record and initial program loader to the image from the other file, again, by making a Python file, which you'll run. And so I've already done all this. I'm just showing you how it goes. And then you'll get the infected disk here, which we just saw. So now we can run the internal debugger on this infected machine. So I need an administrator command prompt window. Let me do that. Right click, and command prompt is fine. Terminal would probably be fine too. All right. Now I need to get to where this box thing lives, which is programs box. All right. And now I can run boxdebug.exe in, I think, quiet mode, running on this file. And that's a file that was created earlier in the instructions. Let me just look in that file to show you what it looks like. It's box source. There. That's this file. This is the file that explains how it's going to boot up. This is very much like VMware's configuration file, the VMX file. The launcher. It just specifies the parameters for this virtual machine, what kind of hardware is being simulated. So we're going to run this boxdebug.exe on that. Oh, copy and paste used to work. Let's see, copy. Maybe I have to hit this, I think that's right. And this, there we go. That's going to run it on that file. So it gives me the console here, and here it boots up a virtual machine. And then I think it has stopped at a breakpoint or something. It has stopped at a certain point here. Now, I think it's running like a debugger. I'm not quite sure. I think it started, it's not running until I give it commands. This is going to put a breakpoint at 7C100. And I think I can't easily see the addresses, but this is what you have to do. Put a breakpoint at 7C100. We're going to see some of the code here. Let me paste that in. There we are. Okay. And now we continue. C continues in the debugger. So it continues, and now it's going through the boot up sequence here. You're now seeing the machine starting. So what we're examining here is the really early boot up process of a virtual machine, not the Windows and Linux stuff we've been doing, but below that, the BIOS, the stuff that scrolls that text around when you're first booting up. That's the boot section. Here it is booting from the first hard disk. All right, now we can examine the first 20 commands of where it is executing right now, which is U/20 for unassemble. And there's the code. And you can see this is running Intel code. And I think it is 32-bit Intel code from the looks of it. Yeah, this looks like 32-bit Intel code. So this is the commands that are being run. That's 7C100, like we talked about. All right. And so now we can put a breakpoint at 7C19, which is 7C19 here. We can put a breakpoint here and run to that point with continue, and then examine the code down there. So we do a load breakpoint at 0x7C19 and continue to that point. Okay, 7C19 was increment SP. It's a little strange. It doesn't look what I expected to see here. Test word. Anyway, then let's U/10. And there it is. It's showing this stuff, which is, oh, I remember. That's right. Explained in the instructions here. What's going on, this is encrypted stuff. And this is the decryptor. So what you used to have at 7C19 was inc SP and test word and an invalid thing. This is encrypted garbage. This code here is what decrypts it, and you can see that it moves this is a loop here. It goes back 6 commands, and so this is decrypting it all. It's rotating the bytes. So it's rotating the bits. That was the form of encryption used. You had to rotate the bits to unscramble this stuff and turn it into real executable code. All right. And so then you can exit by pressing Control-C twice. That'll shut it down. Control-C, Control-C, there. And that will close the machine, and you press Enter, and it'll eventually take it back. So that's a simulator of just the very early boot up process, so you can examine malware at that level. So that's all this was. An early introduction of that kind of malware. And just like all these things I've been talking about, we've only done, of course, just scratching the surface, just the very beginning of it, and you can go a lot deeper in all these ways.
Kind of question.
Yeah.
Would the effect be the same if I boot the machine in safe mode? With the
Well,
malware add
I
this-
think so, because my understanding of safe mode is a Windows feature,
Right.
and what it does is it doesn't load all the drivers, and all that happens after all this.
Ah,
And
so
that's why bootkits are so feared. I mean, if you're infected at the boot level, then replacing the whole hard drive wouldn't stop it.
So safe mode doesn't
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, or I think, depending on where it was, but I mean, it's before any operating system even starts. I guess it's technically, I guess replacing the hard disk would stop it, because the boot sector's on the hard disk. But I think there are even BIOS rootkits that infect the BIOS firmware, and then even replacing the hard disk wouldn't get rid of it.
Yeah, that is beginning.
Yeah, that's why, but that, going down to that real low level is the scariest kind of attack. And that's what Paul Assadorian's company, Imperva, spends his whole life securing that stuff. And by the way, there's also a level below that, which is the base management controller. In the rack, there is a power supply for the computer. And the power supply, and also in the computer they have it, enterprise class computers have a network connection that listens on a funny high port for power commands over the network. So you can like shut down the server by taking over that base controller, and that's even below the BIOS. And those things tend to be vulnerable, and there are attacks that go through them. And you can actually do more than turn off the power. I've been told you can actually insert malware and take over the machine from that power thing, but I don't quite understand how that works. But I've been told that. Now, I'm not aware of any actual real attacks in the wild doing that, but it is something we've known about for years, that these very early stages of the boot up process have strange vulnerabilities that in principle could be exploited. Most of them you have to have physical access, but some of them can in principle be exploited over the network. And normal attackers aren't doing that, but I would imagine that the high-powered attackers like the GCHQ and the NSA are probably doing it.
And so would you say that at such a low level, the vulnerability belongs more to the hardware
Yeah.
than the whatever program,
Yeah.
firmware?
Well,
It's
technically,
even before the firmware.
yeah, you could argue, yes, it's in the hardware or in the firmware that you normally don't change, like the BIOS or the bootloader. It's not in the operating system where you normally think, where you put in files and stuff. It's the stages before that. And the stages before that are usually very simple and very old. They date from the earliest days of computing. Like, most computers, they boot into real mode, where they only can access a small amount of memory. And they have to start that way. And then later on, they go to extended mode. And they also don't have any memory segments or permissions on memory in the earliest thing. It's sort of like, if you look at a baby in the womb, they go through all the stages of evolution. They are like a fish, then they're like a bird. Your computer is like that. First, it's like the very earliest computer, and then like the later one. It goes through all the historical stages during the boot up process. And the earliest stages had no security. And in a way, they sort of can't. That's why, like I had to turn off secure boot just for a project today. Encrypting the early stages will kind of mess things up. Some things won't work anymore. So it's a question. How do you really verify the first stages of boot up? And there's versions of secure boot on the phone and on Mac and on the PC.
Because I thought,
Yeah.
well, for the phone I don't know, but for example, for a computer, I thought
Yeah.
that the very first stage was asking for the micro drive that then asked for, the start all the other processes.
Yeah, the first
the
stage is
beginning, like the wisdom.
the first stage is on a EEPROM chip that has code put there to do the power on self test and stuff, but then it loads the boot sector from the hard drive, and it uses that to get going, and then it hunts for the operating system and loads it, and that's what we just infected. The boot sector and the hard drive is what we just infected.
Boot sector. So is it before the ini?
It's in the
Initialize?
before the what?
Boot, because there is a boot ini.
Well, boot.ini,
I-
yeah, it's before any of that. Yep, before the operating system even starts to boot. This is the code that tells it which disk to use and what sector to go on the disk to boot from.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the point. And that's why it's interesting. If you take like the A+, you learn this. There's a lot of stages in the boot up process. And all of them can get infected too. By the way, you can infect your network card. Your network card has a processor and memory on it. And in principle, it could be infected. And this is actually happening now. A lot of people's routers and firewalls and VPN devices are getting infected. The NSA had all the tools to infect all of them, and the Russians stole it and leaked it about 8 years ago. And now, this is the most common way people get in, is by infecting your edge devices, your load balancer or your VPN concentrator, that's usually how people get in, because that stuff typically has no defense at all, no monitoring, no antivirus. You don't even know. And in fact, it's all over the news now. One of the brands of those has had a vulnerability where if you got infected, they could make a persistent connection that gives them control. And even when you update the firmware and reboot it, they still have control from before. They've got a permanent backdoor in. And yeah, they said there's like 15,000 of those devices running that they have found are in fact infected and under hostile control now, and the companies don't know it. And I think you have to go through some kind of unusual process to get rid of them. Like, I think you'll have to delete all the accounts and recreate them or something like that.
So
Yeah.
just building on this and
Yeah.
speculating. So does this mean, or does this imply then after this boot up process,
Yeah.
the defense mechanism work well, or are becoming so complex that creators of malware say, okay, let's step back, let's go back
Well-
and back and back, because it's easier to.
Well, yeah, I mean, they always evolve for whatever works. Like now most of them don't use malware anymore. They use living on the off the land tools, so they won't shut off your anti-malware. They use like Microsoft system administration tools that are accepted, that aren't malware. And as people get effective at detecting that, they will move somewhere else. And so they moved onto the router, onto the VPN, and moving into the boot process. These are where the most advanced attackers will go, and the average attackers will catch up 5 or 10 years later as the tools get easier to use and the knowledge gets more well known.
Now, another question, but
Yeah.
this is trivial because it's just to understand the process.
Yeah.
You created a disk image.
Yeah.
Because we are working on a virtual machine, you created this image. Could I, for example, could I run the homologous analysis if I had used a flash drive, for example?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, anything you can boot from. Floppy would work too. Yeah.
It's the booting here.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to stop this recording.